This is the Straight Up Breakdown Podcast.
Exclusively on the Hurrdat Media Network.
Tell it to me straight up.
Hello, and welcome into the Straight Up Breakdown Podcast, proudly part of the Hail Varsity Network. I am Greg Smith, your boy. My mind is in a million different places because Nebraska had the biggest recruiting weekend, like the history of the program this weekend. But today I am very happy to be joined by Nebraska staff writer for the Athletic Mitch Sherman. Mitch, thank you for being on, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Greg. Thanks for having me on. It was a busy weekend, capped by a press conference at a coffee house that really didn't break any news, but that was cool. I was really glad that Malachi Coleman did that because so many people have wanted to talk to him, and It was nice to hear from him and hear what's going on. So props to Malachi and his family for putting that on.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and the reaction to that, I guess, has run the gamut. I guess you can say. I thought it was really cool because I totally understand, and kind of knowing him and his family a little bit, like I understand, like the demands on his time, I guess, at this point, and if you think about it, just to break it down for you guys that don't realize, well, first of all, Malachi Coleman, if you don't know, Lincoln East 4-star athlete for the 2023 recruiting class, is now being recruited by the world. This time last year, I think his only offer was Northern Iowa, and then it just kind of really took off from there, where he can now go anywhere in the country that he really wants, right? And so if you think about it, there are a lot of us in the Nebraska media that are after him and trying to figure out what's going on with his recruitment. But you essentially multiply that times however many schools are recruiting him, especially the schools that he's really seriously interested in and considering taking official visits to. And then you kind of have like national folks that are trying to get in there as well. So I kind of understand why he did it. I also understand how it is that we ended up in a spot where he had to open that press conference by saying that I don't know what people thought, but I'm not going to commit, because it did feel very much like a commitment announcement going into it.
Yeah, well, when you show up on a stage with microphones and you're wearing the gear of the school you just visited and the people around you are doing the same and you're in that town, I get that it has the feel, but Malachi Coleman and his family never gave the impression that this was going to be a short process. We know the schools that are after him, that Georgia and Oklahoma and Oregon and the powers around the country that want him. It would have been a shocker if he took one official visit to Nebraska and said, okay, I'm done. It may well be the place that he ends up. And the way that he talks about Mickey Joseph, I think if Nebraska shows what he hopes and what Nebraska fans hope that they show this fall in 2022, it's likely that he ends up in Lincoln picking Nebraska over all of those places. But there are some things that still have to fall into place. So, I'm one of those people who have tried, and as I'm sure you are, to talk to Malachi on the record during this process ahead of his visit. And, he has politely declined, because if he says yes, then he's got to do a million of those things. So I appreciated getting the note yesterday that he was going to do that. I was coaching my 11-year-old on the baseball field and then getting rained on right before that thing happened. So I was able to join on a live stream that they provided. Even better. The whole thing, I thought it was great that they did it, and it was good to hear from him and kind of know where he stands.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Now, each week we have a couple of segments that are mainstays of the show. The first one is called Coach Speak, where we go over something that a coach, player, or a talking head said, and then we give you the straight up breakdown of what they meant.
Coach Speak to Real Talk.
Now, this week comes courtesy of someone who's appeared on the show with various quotes talking about his family down at LSU, Brian Kelly. He had this to say, quote, "I just think we're in a different place," Kelly said when it came to the administration at Notre Dame. The administration felt like they were in a position where they had done what they needed to do. I felt like there was more that needed to be done, and I was fine with that decision. They will continue to move their program forward. My clock was just in a different place. He went on to say, "This happens everywhere in life. This was not antagonistic. There was no bitterness, but it's just that my clock and in terms of what I need to see happen was at a different time. But they'll get to those things. It's just the opportunity opened up here at the same time. It's time and place. And in this opportunity is one that I felt like I just needed to take." So, Mitch, what did all of that mean from Brian Kelly?
Let's break that down.
Yeah. Okay, I'll stick that into the translator. That means I tried and failed multiple times to beat Alabama and Clemson while at Notre Dame. It means my former school is not going to do what it takes to get me access to enough of the players that will win those games consistently, and LSU will. LSU will do everything, and LSU will pay me $100 million. So that's the end of the discussion.
Yeah, like I think that it's really, to me, this one is really clear on what he's trying to say. It's all of those things, and I think this is one of those weird things in college football that where Notre Dame is obviously like a power player in the sport, but they operate in a different way than basically every other one of those power players in the sport, right? And so you do run into a situation where whether it be the academic standards or just kind of the optics around things of what Notre Dame will allow to go on to make their football program the best it can possibly be. And you don't have those same roadblocks at, say, LSU, obviously, Alabama, USC, Texas. Some of these other schools are willing to look the other way on a number of things in a way that Notre Dame just isn't willing to do.
Well, and I think as we move more into the transfer portal era and even the NIL era, although I'm sure Notre Dame is jumping in with NIL. There are going to be schools that find loopholes that continue to push the envelope in ways that Notre Dame is going to be slow to do, that Notre Dame is more comfortable with. Notre Dame wants to win and do it in an idealistic way that, harkens back to 70 years ago. And, we just live and watch college football in a much different time. LSU has none of those limitations. Whatever it sees Alabama do, whatever it sees Clemson or Tennessee or Michigan or Texas do or Ohio State, LSU is going to try to do that bigger and better and in a hurry. So there you go. That's why Brian Kelly's in a strange place right now, which is Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
I cannot wait I don't know about you, but I can't. That's one of the, it's just like things outside of Nebraska that I can't wait to see unfold. Like how that whole thing with Brian Kelly and LSU goes, it's just really interesting to me. Like I am interested in how Marcus Freeman kind of takes Notre Dame in a different direction and pushes them forward. But the whole Brian Kelly experiment, I guess, has the possibility of really blowing up because a couple things are true about LSU. You can win a national championship there for sure. The last few coaches have done that, but you can also get fired in a hurry because they've also done that. So it's just a really fascinating place.
Yeah, I don't imagine it's going to be quite as awkward behind the scenes as it's been out front on some of the public-facing material that LSU has produced with Brian Kelly in these early months of his time in Baton Rouge. But if it's anywhere close to that, then this thing is destined to fail. But he's a good coach, and I think he's going to find a way to make himself fit there, if at all possible. I'm just not sure if that's possible.
Right. That's the problem with it. Now, hey, Mitch, one of the things I wanted to get to you today with too, and the main reason I wanted to have you on is that Nebraska has undergone quite the change this offseason, right? And it's something that as the closer we get to the season, I don't know about you, but the more I think about just how many things are now different with this program based on where it was when the final buzzer hit for the Iowa game, right? You've got, 4 new assistant coaches. You've got on the offensive side of the ball and Bill Bush. You've got 15 transfers that come in. I think it's 18 newcomers, including junior college players. You just now basically settled the roster and it's now June, right? So to my question, I want to start this discussion here is this. Are people underestimating how big of an undertaking this is to make all of these changes and then hit the ground running this season in a must-win season?
I think some people are. I'm trying not to. It's something that I've thought about quite a bit since this whole process started in late November. I mean, really, it started after the Ohio State game on the Monday after the Ohio State game when Scott Frost made the offensive coaching staff changes that he did when Trev Alberts made the announcement that Scott Frost would return under some different conditions in 2022. It started then and then really picked up speed in December. And from the beginning, one of the concerns for Nebraska that I've had is, okay, how is this thing going to all come together in the locker room? And you throw in the NIL aspect, which I think is always going to be, a possible point of contention for any team, not just Nebraska. I mean, you can go to the most functional college football program in America, the most well-run, perfectly operating machine, and you throw NIL and all of its complexities into that picture, and it's going to have the possibility of stirring up some problems. So you put that in at Nebraska, on top of the fact that you have 15 Division I transfers who are all coming in, Greg, as you know, with the expectation to play. None of these guys come from other Division I schools and say, okay, I'm going to sit for a year, possibly with the quarterback. I mean, I think Chubba Purdy understands that, there's a path for him with 4 years of eligibility left, that if Casey Thompson is the guy, which it appears will be the case, that he may not be as impatient as most of the others. But really, almost all of these guys are going to be impatient. That's why you enter the transfer portal to begin with in many cases. So, it's they're going to have to really earn their salaries. The coaches will, and the support staff, and all of the pieces that Scott Frost has put into place to kind of help make this thing work outside of the roster pieces. They have their work cut out for them, absolutely, to make this a locker room that is harmonious. You see potential pitfalls really all over the place at different position groups.
Yeah, you absolutely do. And one of the things too, and I'm glad you mentioned NIL and the transfers, because to me, those things go together, right? And the reason is that not only, and you're correct, not only do those guys want to come in and play right away, that's why they were in the portal. Nebraska was able to use NIL in a way that, the top dogs in the sport are doing it right now, which is good for the program. You got to get those players here. But what I wonder about is that when you combine some of those NIL deals, and listen, we're never going to know if some of those figures that are floating around are actually true, but even if they're close to being true, when you combine that with the number of portal guys you've brought in, and oh, by the way, you have players already on the roster that are now being jumped by those players that have now come in and either gotten those NIL deals or come in just via the transfer portal, the traditional way. And those guys that are already on the team, it would stand to reason that they're looking around like, wait a second, like I thought I was next in line. Like there could end up being that sort of, and that's where I think that you can run the danger of messing up locker room chemistry or popping up new issues, because it's not as if things have been harmonious to begin with, right? Yeah. Like you could see it to where if they don't get off to a hot start, it could really go sideways for them, which is why I really think that this is going one of two ways. It's either going to be great or it's going to be awful. Like I don't think there's going to be a real in between.
Hey, as a writer, I have to say that sounds okay. Just from the standpoint that I want the story to be interesting. And what's not interesting at Nebraska right now? Another season like what we've seen, not necessarily last year, because last year was pretty devastatingly bad at 3-9. But you get in that 6-6 range, that 5-7 range, and where you're in limbo, and all of a sudden there are more hard decisions to be made. I think Nebraska fans have a certain level of patience, and it's very, very high. But it's also starting to wane. And 5 consecutive losing seasons. If you get into a spot where there's another one, but it's not so bad that change is obvious, that's where apathy starts to set in. And that's just a difficult place for any college football program to be. Look, and going back to that NIL discussion, I mean, money is kind of the root of all evil. It's an old saying. And I don't know why we would expect it to be any different for 19 to 23-year-olds. These guys are going to understand what the player next to them in the locker room is earning via NIL. And it's idealistic to say, oh, if we have this team attitude and the culture is right, then that's not going to create a problem. Go look at any workplace in America. That's out the window. It does create a problem if there is unfair inequity. And there's going to be unfair inequity just because of the way that NIL has seeped into recruiting. There's going to be a player who comes in at Nebraska and other places around the country who is earning a large chunk from NIL, but playing behind someone who's been loyal and has returned to that program and isn't getting anywhere near what that player who came in through the portal is getting. And that's going to create hard feelings. So what's your leadership like internally with the players, with the coaches? How are you going to police that? How are you going to navigate those issues and prevent that from being something that keeps you from reaching your potential on the field on Saturday?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is something that, and I wouldn't necessarily blame hard feelings being felt about that type of situation either. And I think the great equalizer, though, and all of that, even though it will still kind of crop up either way, if your team is winning, that will help that, right? That will kind of keep some of that at bay. The same way that like some of the transfers stuff kind of gets kept at bay if your team is winning and they're producing NFL players because they know that, hey, like a guy at Ohio State for the most part knows that, like a defensive back at Ohio State knows for the most part that if they wait their turn, they're going to play well, and then they're going to go to the NFL, right? That carrot at the end of the stick ends up helping. But if you don't have that, then you can really run into some issues. Now, one of the other things, too, is that, and we hit on this a little bit, but I want to go deeper into it, is that the coaching staff and how they have to come together quickly this offseason, I think, to me, is a really underrated part of what's happening this offseason for Nebraska. And I think rightfully so, a lot of headlines have gone to, and talk has gone to the player situation and NIL and all of that, and that's worthy. But you have a coach in Scott Frost who is, I don't know how to describe this, has not always been known as a great communicator, and you're going to have to button that up really fast across a staff now that has a lot more experience and can be probably is a lot more strong-willed behind the scenes. That part of that group meshing together is going to be fascinating to me this year.
Yeah, I like on the defensive and special teams side of it, obviously not as much change on the defensive side. You really just have Mike Dawson adding some responsibility. I like where they're at and how I project that thing to come together. And on special teams, because Bill Busch is such a good communicator and is so detail-oriented, I think the transition will go smoothly for him to take over special teams and to delegate responsibilities. I think Nebraska will be a much improved special teams organization. Now, that's an interesting thing to say with how bad it has been the past few years, but I really do think that they have unlocked the key to success on special teams by bringing in Bill Busch in this role. Offensively, it's a much different conversation, and it may work, but there's a lot of hurdles to overcome in much the same way that we talked about the locker room and meshing the transfers in and the newcomers in with the existing players or the returning players. Mark Whipple's offensive system, Mark Whipple calling plays, Mark Whipple's passing schemes, his quarterback, his style of pass blocking meshed with what Scott Frost wants to do in being a physical unit that moves the line of scrimmage with the offensive line, and how he implemented that with Donovan Raiola right away in spring practice. That is extremely interesting to me to see how those two things come together. How much will Scott Frost be involved in dictating everything that Nebraska does in the run game? And with that, does Mark Whipple's offense fit into that system? Can you do those two things simultaneously?
Yeah, that's going to be a really key thing to be able to watch unfold, and we've got a lot of time to see it happen. It's going to be fascinating. Now, every week we end the show with a segment that's my favorite one of the week called Put 'em on Blast, where we put someone on blast or something that they did or said. I'm going to let the guests go first as usual this week. So, Mitch, who do you got?
Put them on blast.
Yeah, so I'm putting Greg Sankey in the SEC on blast. Maybe you've gotten to this in the past, and if so, I apologize. But, I think it's probably worth bringing them up again for their continued holier-than-thou attitude about the SEC's spot in college football. I would say to the SEC leaders, you're so frustrated with the movement toward an expanded college football playoff that you're going to now talk, as they did in late May, about going to your own college football playoff. I would say go ahead. And why not just join the NFL while you're at it? Be a junior division of the NFL. Maybe the winner of your college football playoff can play the Super Bowl champ. Let's see how that goes for you, SEC. The frustrating thing here, Greg, is that the SEC is the entity that actually blew up the accelerated talk of playoff expansion 1 year ago when it decided to secretly work with Oklahoma and Texas to join its own league. I know those kind of conversations can't be had in public, but don't act like you're better than everyone else and fighting for the good of the sport when clearly the SEC is out entirely only to make the SEC stronger.
That is a very worthy blast, and we have gotten to them in a roundabout way. And it's funny because my first thought on where I wanted to go was also about the SEC, and it relates to NIL. Because I don't know if you also saw the story where Greg Sankey also the same week talked about them being able to rein in NIL and have their own regulations about it. To which basically every lawyer attorney out there said this would be struck down in court resoundingly and swiftly. And so because that was essentially in the original Austin ruling that, there would be less oversight. And so the SEC's role in college football and their outsized role in college football already bothers fans all over the country. But I really think that it is reaching a boiling point to where they have just an overinflated self-worth of where they are in the sport. And it's just ridiculous to see some of the things that come out of this as, oh, by the way, they have as much infighting as they possibly can within their coaches. Like it's just an incredible thing to see unfold. And so for all of those reasons and more, we're both putting the SEC on blast, and it's well-deserved.
It's like you're standing out in front of your house that's burning to the ground, telling everyone else how they need to be safe, how they need to stay safe and prevent disasters from happening. The SEC, I get the feeling that the SEC thinks that it should collectively as a unit should just be in charge of college football. And in this, there's a vacuum of leadership undoubtedly in not just college football, but in college sports in general. So, hey, maybe the SEC should just take a crack at it and try to be in charge of the whole thing and see how that goes. My guess is it wouldn't be great.
Yeah, my guess is they would drive everyone off of a cliff as well. But that's going to do it for us this week. Subscribe to the podcast everywhere you listen to them. Rate us and leave us a 5-star review. If you leave 4, I'm inclined to think you're a hater and nobody wants that. Make sure that you're checking out the other podcasts on the Hail Varsity Network, the Mind Your Own podcast, Varsity Club, Nebraska Preps post-game show, and the Hail Varsity radio show. Also, make sure you're checking out the Hail Varsity YouTube page. I'm back on there with plenty of recruiting content and also on hailvarsity.com. You can catch us on Twitter at Greg Smith HB and at Mitch Sherman. I will catch y'all next week.